Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Lane Kiffin, this Ole Miss team, this is the version of this Ole Miss team we expected to see at the start of 2024. If this offense can continue to play how they've played the last couple of weeks, there's no doubt in my mind that this is a college football playoff team. Now, even going back to the week against Oklahoma last week, it wasn't as many yards and as many points. But we both kind of said this Ole Miss offense finally looks healthy again. They're multidimensional. They're getting the ball to every blade of grass on the football field. They were able to do it again today against a pretty dang good Arkansas defense. Dill, if they can continue to play like this in the back half of 2024, there is no doubt in my mind they can get into the college football playoffs. Obviously, a massive matchup against Georgia. Next week, you get them at home. Want to get into just a few takeaways from this football game, talk about what this Ole Miss team can do looking forward in 2024. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Ole Miss fans, one, y'all have rocked with the fellas for a very long time, going back to when we covered this team in the transfer portal. It finally feels good to talk about the best version of this Ole Miss team we've seen. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. I love to hear from the Ole Miss fans in terms of the confidence that we're gaining within this team. Dill, I'll give you the T-box here. Ole Miss putting together what I think is probably back-to-back their two most complete games that we've seen in 2024. How are we feeling?
And their offense has come alive. And the disappointing part to the start of that SEC season was their defense is playing great, and it was playing great right through, even when Ole Miss was losing games. But now you've seen that offense, again, do exactly what you said. Look what you were kind of hoping they'd look to, where, again, they have a lot of weapons. They're using them. They're getting the tight ends involved. They're getting their slot receivers involved. I mean, that's the day I think you want from Caden Lee. Obviously, Jordan Watkins, getting him downfield, making big plays. I think, to me, what I'm frankly looking for is, what does this team look when Trey Harris comes back? Because that, to me, it's like, I don't want to say he's slowed them down, because he obviously hasn't. But the issue was, it felt like Jaxson Dart was slowing himself down by just not getting anyone else involved besides Trey Harris.
It was this with Ole Miss when Trey Harris was healthy. It seemed like they were so reliant on just throwing vertical shots to Trey Harris. It only seemed like that was the only thing that they wanted to do on the offensive side of the football. It felt like such a one-dimensional offense when Trey Harris was on the football field. Look, I don't think either of us are getting up here and saying this Ole Miss offense is better off without Trey Harris. He's by far one of the best wide receivers that we see in the country. But with the absence of Trey Harris, it has forced Ole Miss to realize that you got a lot of other weapons on the football field, and there are a lot of other portions of the football field that you can attack besides just 20-plus yards down the field. And that's what we've seen this Ole Miss offense do.
And again, they're getting to some of that easy stuff, and I think that's gotten Jaxson Dart going a little bit, because he just didn't feel like he was playing with any rhythm. I mean, as much as we want to talk about the play calling, Jaxson Dart also wasn't playing particularly great for the first portion of that SEC season. And again, you put this type of performance together today where he's hitting his shots. When he gets his shots down the field, he was hitting them. I mean, I feel like they left so many points out on the board on big plays, whether it was drops, whether it was Jaxson Dart missing. I mean, this is the type of game. They didn't really miss a whole lot. When they had their chance to hit plays, they hit them. But also they were able to kind of march that ball down the field by taking what was there.
It feels like you're not just relying on the vertical shots. And it's almost like Jaxson Dart's a basketball player. Like, how do you want to get a basketball player going? I ain't much of a basketball guy, but you want to see them get the ball in the hoop a little bit. Like, give them some easy buckets, give them some easy throws. Let Jaxson Dart gain some of that confidence, and then all of a sudden he's starting to hit on the vertical shots when they're present. It feels like kind of what you said. We're going to take some of the easy stuff. We're going to manufacture some of the easy stuff. And then when the opportunity presents itself to push the ball down the field, now we're going to go and capitalize on it. That's something you just didn't see from this Ole Miss offense over the beginning of SEC play. Now you're starting to see them do that. Dill, at Daquan Wright, look, I think we've been the Ole Miss fans who've been rocking with the boys going back from the summer. Like, I thought this dude was one of the more underrated tight ends that you saw in the transfer portal. I'm not anti-Caden Prescorn. I'm just a very big fan of Wright. He needs to continue to get involved. There are so many different ways, as a knock down my coffee cup, so many different ways that you can get him involved, whether it's ripping the seam, whether it's getting him in space out in terms of yards after the catch in the flat. he's got a little bit more juice than Caden
He
Prescorn.
just simply has more access to a deeper route tree because Caden Prescorn, as much as like he's sure-handed guy, he does a good job doing like kind of the basics of what you want your tight end to do. He's just not a premier athlete for that position. And you look at Daquan Wright, it's kind of the opposite. And again, I think they can use him in a lot more ways. And I mean, he probably has to be the guy going forward at that tight end position, just looking at how effective he's been for Ole Miss versus what they've kind of gotten from Prescorn. I'd be really surprised if he doesn't still take the lion's share. Not to say Caden Prescorn doesn't have a role in this offense, because, again, there's things he can do that help them, but I do think they really should be leaning on Wright because at the end of the day, I just think he's got more in
You're
the bag.
looking at a 250-pound body that runs an 11-second 100-meter dash. Like, that is exactly what you're looking for from a matchup nightmare tight end. The run game wasn't great. The thing is, like, I think they're working off the run game. Like, a lot of these successful passing plays came off some RPOs and came off some play action. Look, if Ole Miss is struggling to run the football, I think that's okay as long as they're kind of using a little bit of the extension of the run game, like a lot of dump off stuff into the flat that not necessarily a run in the box score, but essentially is a run game. That was kind of what Ole Miss was doing on the ground. Again, I think going back to what we said against Oklahoma last week, it was the healthiest this Ole Miss offense looked. Like they were getting the football to every blade of grass of the football field. They weren't just being reliant on throwing the ball vertically. Look, there's a lot of playmakers on this offense. Use all those playmakers. It's more than just Trey Harris, and that's kind of what we've seen from back-to-back weeks from this Ole Miss team. Now, Dill, let's get to the reason why the boys are fired up about this Ole Miss team, and that's the defense. Like we've continued to say, even when Ole Miss was struggling and losing to Kentucky, blowing a game against LSU, this Ole Miss defense is one of the best units, not only in the SEC, but in the country. In terms of negative plays, it doesn't get better than Ole Miss. Against Oklahoma last week, 10 sacks, 15 TFLs. Against Arkansas, 8 sacks, 13 tackles for a loss. Dill, our biggest question mark was, can they continue to get after the passer, but also deal with what Taylon Green can do extending plays when you have, and we kind of said this in our preview, when you got a guy like Centarian Perkins, who is probably the best player as a spy that you see in the country, it gets a lot easier to, hey, we're going to pin our ears back and just rely Perkins to be that run and chase kind of guy when Taylon Green tries to extend. That's exactly what they did. Limiting the amount of times Taylon Green can get outside of the pocket and hurt you. Massive storyline for this Ole Miss defense.
And you said it, his emergence and being a bit more of a complete player. I mean, today had
Yeah.
some sacks where he just straight winning his one-on-one opportunities. Again, that was something you probably wanted to see more of because you saw those highlight plays and how good he was in space and how effective he was as more of a blitz kind of stunt defensive end. But again, starting to emerge into a bit of a more complete player and also just his effort level. I mean, him chasing that ball down, getting a fumble, like he just plays really fast. I think this whole Miss defense, like that mentality, I think they're just playing aggressive. They're really, really fast. You just look at overall team speed. I mean, that's a dominant defense. And I don't want to leave out those defensive tackles, Xavier Harris and Nikello Stone. Those two played a really, really good game. And again, that's another thing. You got to get the depth through that program.
That was like the big, like Ole Miss, hey, it's no secret they want to run fast, which means the defense is going to have to play a lot of football. You got to be deep on the defensive line. And Ole Miss is deep in the front seven, which is, again, another – this Ole Miss defense, it just feels different from the previous defenses we've seen under Lane Kiffin. Dill, going back to Perkins real quick, they have a better feel for how they want to use him. Like last year, we're like, all right, we got to get this kid on the football field as a freshman because he's too good to not be on the field. I don't necessarily sure if I know Ole Miss knew how to use him. Now there's a much better purpose when he's on the football field. Another shout out to Princely U. Dill, we know what he can do as a pure pass rusher. One of the best in the game. We saw that again against Arkansas. Really, really good against the run too, which is kind of that gap in his game. He's starting to put it together. Ole Miss secondary I thought was solid, but when you have the ability to, we kind of talked about this with Tennessee. Like this Ole Miss defense is just swarming around the football field. They are flying. The team speed is just different. They're playing really aggressive. They're creating a lot of negative plays. That's the recipe to having an elite defense. And I know it wasn't like an elite performance. It kind of got into garbage time shootout, like flag football in the second half. That first half's about as dominant as it gets for Ole Miss. I guess now I want to open up a conversation quickly here. Like, what does Ole Miss need to do to make the college football playoffs? They obviously need to beat Georgia next week, but I think more importantly, they need to look the part. Like they got to have more of these kind of performances because when you're talking about a two-loss Ole Miss team, I think they can get in winning out, But if you want to make sure you're getting into the college football playoffs, you got to pass the eyeball test too. If Ole Miss can continue to do what they did against Arkansas, beat Georgia, continue to roll through these teams and make statements, the way this Ole Miss team is playing, and if they play like this the rest of November, I don't see how you can leave this team out of the college football playoffs because they're clearly a top 12 team that we see in the country.
Yeah, if they beat Georgia, I don't think that, and they
And
obviously
then
went
win
out.
out. Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be much of a question. Frankly, you look at the SEC. I mean, it's going to be hard to leave out 2-loss SEC teams when you look kind of across the country.
Yep.
In the ACC. I mean, they'll struggle, frankly, to get one in. I think unless Clemson somehow is able to upset Miami in that conference championship game. So again, I think you feel pretty good if you're Ole Miss. I think you do control your own destiny at this point. But they do have no margin for error. And I think you're right. They don't even really have the margin to play a close game against a team they shouldn't be playing close
with. But I think at the end of the day, what excites me the most and why we're deciding to talk about this game was like this is the version of Ole Miss that we knew was in there. And we're finally starting to see it. We'll close it out there. Again, Ole Miss fans, let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.